Good evening, to our viewers on NTN, Facebook, and YouTube, and welcome to the 2021-22 budget review. Tonight we are going to discuss the 2021-2022 budget with our esteemed panel. I'm going to introduce that panel to you. That panel is in the person of Mr. Roderick Sherry, who is the CEO of Invest St. Lucia. We have with us Mr. Richard Peterkin, who is an accountant and partner at Grant Thornton. And we are also joined by Mr. Vincent Boland, who is the managing director of the St. Lucia Development Bank. And in the coming few minutes, we will also be joined by the Director of Finance, Miss S. Rigobert, apologies. We apologize for the late start, but notwithstanding that, we are going to begin and jump right into it. I'll invite the panelists to say a few remarks on the budget. What were their thoughts? What are some of the things that they were happy to see? What were some of the things that they believe are or were missing from the budget? And then we are going to go through tonight looking at the budget in four key components. We are going to be looking at the global and regional context within which the budget was crafted. We are also going to look at the domestic context that underpins the 2021-22 budget. We are going to look at the budget by the numbers. And lastly, we are going to go through the policies that were in the budget. But before we do that, we are just going to get a high-level overview from each of the panelists on what they thought with respect to the 2021-22 budget. And we will start with Mr. Sherry, yourself, CEO of Invest St. Lucia. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you very much, Janai. What I've seen in this budget is that there is support for economic growth that is driven by various policy initiatives. Generally, my view that it is important that the policy framework builds confidence for investors and the business community, and the policy initiatives of this budget attempts to do that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Peterkin, what are your thoughts?
Well, it was kind of a long budget, so we could spend a long time talking about the thoughts. It was interesting in the sense that it was not a budget that promised a lot of things. It did not have a lot of, little special incentives that typically you would see in a budget, sometimes even more so in an election year.
Yep.
And it, to a large extent, it was saying this is what the government has done, this has been its policies, they're putting that into place, and it's beginning to work, and they believe this is what, is going to take us through a difficult period. I guess I'm glad that there were no new taxes. That's always a big one for me particularly. I would have liked to have seen some other things, but we'll get into that as the night goes on.
And Mr. Boland, what were your thoughts on the budget this year?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I think the budget for me is, it's really a collection of us looking at last year and rolling it into this year.
Okay.
So it contains, some bold and decisive responses that we have had to have for the COVID, to reignite the economy. So I see a lot of positives.
Okay.
I see, things are in there to support the persons impacted by what we've seen, that how COVID has impacted us, and it's really looking at addressing that and positioning the economy for us to really move forward once things settle down.
Thank you for that. One of the first things we want to do is to look at the global context. So the budget is essentially predicated on not only a rebound in our global sphere or the global economy, but also a rebound in our regional partners as well. To the extent that materializes or does not materialize, one could imagine that is going to have significant consequences for the year 2021-2022. Mr. Peterkin, I want to start with you to get a sense as with respect to that global context of rebound following 2020. Do you see a strong rebound in 2021, 2022? And if so, what do you think is going to drive that rebound?
I follow, global economies very closely on Bloomberg and others.
Yeah.
And across the board, including the IMF and the other IMFs, they're all saying that there is going to be substantial economic growth, partly because of what they call the base effect. You're coming from such a low level that you're almost bound to get, a high percentage. And then because of the stimulus programs like the 2.1 trillion in the States, the expectation is, and people have been saving money over the last year, is that they will in fact see significant improvement and growth in the economies that matter largely to us, the US and the UK. That's encouraging. There are of course a lot of things that could impair and impact that. But if that in fact happened to be, did come about, then we stand to benefit largely because of tourism, because it would mean that people are happier to travel, want to travel, and we will then hopefully see a rebound in the people that come back from that come from the States and England. So that's the good side.
Okay.
The bad side, as the IMF always points out, is there are significant downside risks to these assumptions. And there are a number of things that can happen that can, wash away a lot of those, including fourth waves in the virus, et cetera, et cetera. So we can't take it for granted. And we have to assume and ensure that if in fact everything doesn't turn out according to plan, that we can deal with it. But if it does, the entire OECS should benefit from it. St. Lucia certainly, as the biggest economy in the OECS, should benefit from it, because a lot of our growth tends to come from growth from outside. And so there is hope that in fact we will see that.
And before I leave for Mr. Pisakin, I just want to acknowledge that today is his birthday. So part of our late start was us singing him happy birthday. I'm not sure if he appreciated the tune, but thank you and for being here on your birthday, much appreciated. So you do believe that there will be a rebound in 2020, notwithstanding the downside risk. And with what we are seeing in St. Vincent, we know that downside risks are ever present. Mr. Boland, do you see what's happening in St. Vincent affecting sort of the regional context in any way? Obviously, when the budget was crafted, the events in St. Vincent had not unfolded to the magnitude that we are seeing now. Do you see that impacting us in any way at all?
Well, I think the events in St. Vincent really are good. The impact is going to be an extension of what we've been feeling already.
Yeah.
The COVID has caused everyone to rethink their business model, persons rethink their own way of attaining their living. We may see that we have to support the Vincentians as best as we can, and part of our process will see that if we have the volume of roadworks and the volume of activity going on, then we may be able to bring them in.
Yeah.
We've always spoken of the need to increase our population level in St. Lucia, and if it is that we in this unfortunate situation have persons who now have to migrate to St. Lucia, the budget now shows that we have activities that will allow for them to become a part of that.
Thank you for that. Mr. Sherry, your thoughts on the St. Vincent and the extent to which it may actually impact us, and also the global context of the budget. Do you see a rebound in terms of when you meet and speak with investors? Is the climate becoming more and more favorable so that we can expect over the 2021 to 2022 period a rebound and an improvement going forward?
Okay, so concerning the events in St. Vincent, first of all, it's very unfortunate, and I think our prayers do go out to the Vincentians. They are, after all, our closest neighbor. On the global context, as pertains to investment, we have seen that the pipeline over the last year has grown. The issue that we have seen, though, is that lots of projects that we've been working on have slowed down, but every single one of our project proposals or our projects that are pretty firm they've been a commitment. But in the meantime, though, we've seen a lot more interest in long-term tourism projects, and we've seen interest also in alternative energy projects, which is very encouraging. The issue, though, is that these are more long term, because when you look at the life cycle of a project, for a project start to actually boots on the ground, we're probably looking at up to 7 years. So when with the pipeline growth that we're seeing, it's more, I would say, medium to long term. But as pertains to short term, the industry players that we've been speaking to, particularly in tourism, itching to start traveling again. So tourism industry experts have told us that advanced booking for the second half of this year look fairly strong. Not at the pre-COVID-19 levels, but pretty strong. But of course, as Mr. Peterkin was saying, we're not sure what's going to happen. There may be a fourth wave in the source markets and so on. So I think the view right now is optimistic that there will be a turnaround. But nevertheless, we have to keep our fingers crossed.
Thank you for those responses. Now, the main reason why we are speaking of a rebound is, of course, the impact which COVID-19 had on our 2020 economic and socio-economic performance as well. A large part of the budget spoke in depth with respect to the response to COVID-19, but I wanted to get from the panelists what their thoughts were in terms of the lessons learned coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, and going forward, how can St. Lucia put itself in a position to better withstand issues that may arise like COVID-19. Mr. Peterkin, can I start with you in terms of lessons learned from COVID-19?
Well, I suppose it was a real shock. I don't think it was something that anybody in the world expected. So I can't say that the government was exactly in a position to deal, to be able to deal with it without any problems. But it certainly, we were forced and faced with a number of things in which we had no control and no choice.
Yeah.
And clearly the immediate impact and throughout the year was to control the health situation.
Yeah.
And that's what the government said. Until they get COVID under control, nothing else will be of any significance. So, a lot of money had to be spent on hospitals and different aspects of putting in the protocols and whatnot. And it's safe to say that while mistakes were made, that right now, based on the numbers we're seeing, we appear to be turning the corner.
Okay.
And we're seeing a much lower positivity rate, a lower death rate, and there's hope that we can start to loosen up the economy a little more because of that. And so at times during the year there was a kind of a little bit of flip-flopping as governments loosened the controls and then had to tighten them back up again. And each time that happened, I guess a lesson was learned. But clearly there was an organization in place. There was a COVID command center. Monies were allocated. Funding was obtained by IMF and other IMIs. And so it would appear on an overall basis, when you look at it, that we managed to do what was necessary, even though, as I say, mistakes were made, and perhaps had we been maybe a little stricter in certain things, we may not have had the number of positive cases that we did. But hopefully it's under control now. And the interesting thing about politics during and after COVID is that, as we're finding out all over the world, elections that are happening after or during COVID, generally it's all about how the government handled the crisis and whether you were a good management during the crisis. And that's what's going to make a difference in terms of a government's electability or re-electability. And so to that extent, the budget had a lot about how good the government has done during the crisis for good reasons, right? I mean, that's obviously what they got to say. And I think, there will be some that perhaps believe, that there's certain things that could have been done better. There's still people that believe we should never have opened the borders. I'm not one of them. I believe, we had to do something there. But at the end of the day, and we hope, right, that the present trend will continue, because if it doesn't, and it starts to get worse again, and it shows that, like it's happening in Canada now, and the government is under a lot of pressure because of that. So I'd say that we realized as a government, as a people, that we had to make sacrifices. The good thing about it was happening all over the world, so we didn't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
And we could see what was going on in those countries that handled it well, like New Zealand and so on. And I believe that they hopefully, they mirrored on a lot of those things and put principles and policies into place, some of which we'll discuss later as to whether they were successful in order to deal with it.
All right. And Mr. Boland, to you, because the budget also spoke in some depth with respect to some of the policies that the St. Lucia Development Bank did in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. What are some of your thoughts and your views in terms of lessons learned, and how will the bank react going forward with respect to recovering and assisting with the COVID-19 pandemic?
So what all of us would have recognized that overnight the virus revealed our vulnerability, and our vulnerability in the context of the interconnection of the supply chain, and all of us being interconnected.
Yeah.
So when we saw the declines, and when you do your research and you see that worldwide there was I think they told me it was 1 billion fewer people arrivals in the different markets, tourism markets, that it impacted us from our farmers, it impacted us to the hotels, and then the whole chain got impacted. And we saw the government putting in their various social stimulus packages, and trying to get people at least first of all protected against the virus, and then also now trying to see if they can survive. And the lesson I think that we all had to have learned was we don't want this to happen to us again.
Yeah.
Particularly, for instance, if we just take it down to the individual, the ordinary person on the street. He had, overnight he saw the supermarkets closed, everywhere closed, and he didn't know what to do. We are now hoping that, similarly like how the bank has been promoting rainwater harvesting and getting water tanks and so on, preparing for droughts, I'm hoping that people are also saying, okay, let me make sure I prepare for this, if in the event of a fourth wave or something happening, that it doesn't come and impact me as directly as that. From the bank's perspective, we tried to jump quickly to see how we could have provided support in getting the climate adaptation financing facility adjusted, so to allow people now to come in and access funding to get through a sort of an incubation period, because we knew, or I would say a hibernation period. We needed people to say, okay, let's lay low, let's try and ride this out, hoping it would have just lasted a short time. We know it's now much longer than expected. So we're seeing people now saying, okay, let me either reposition my business, or as an individual, let me reposition myself, let me make sure my moratorium is in place so that I can have an easier payment. And one other thing, you asked maybe what else can be done. I think there's a need for us to look more at a level of reskilling people. We're seeing that coming through the SKY program that the government is running with the UK, where they are asking for 1,000 people to come and say what training there are specific training programs that are being run. But I think people need to look at that very, very closely. I sometimes stop and I think, what would St. Lucia be without tourism? No. And the impact that will have on lives is tremendous. That's what we have. We don't have oil gushing out to the ground. We don't have minerals that we can go and dig up gold and diamonds and so on. We have our people. We have a climate that everybody loves, the sand and the sea and so on. But there are things that we still need to look at closely to see what it is that we would do if we didn't have that.
Right, and we are going to go in somewhat depth with respect to tourism and some of the other issues that was raised in the 2021-2022 budget. But just to touch on the theme for this year's budget, adapting, overcoming, and persevering, we are a resilient nation. What in the budget, in your view, sort of underscored that resiliency, or underscored that adaptability? One can assume that overcoming is referring to COVID-19 and some of the other issues there. But from your view, I just want to find out where we say adapting, where we say resiliency and whatnot. Were there any aspects in there that sort of underscored resiliency? Mr. Peterkin, and then I'll probably go to Mr. Boland, because I know the SLDB does have a few programs that do speak a bit to resiliency and so forth. And then I'll probably ask Mr. Cherry just his general thoughts. But Mr. Peterkin?
Well, on the question of resiliency, it's not a new notion, and I think over the years you see the same thing popping up as countries like ours have realized are forced to do certain things to prepare ourselves for potential shocks and things that happen to us all the time, therefore being resilient. We weren't prepared for this. Nobody was for COVID. So the extent to which we were able to make the changes and can now say we are much better prepared and more resilient. We have almost a fully functioning hospital. We have a mechanism to put in protocols that, as necessary and so on. We have obtained vaccinations, etc. All point towards that. And then other measures that were taken in some of the critical sectors, improvements of infrastructure being one of the big ones, because obviously if your infrastructure is not in place, all your sectors are affected. So that is an important part of your resiliency. And clearly that's part of the policy, and the government pointed to a number of things that they have done or are doing to improve our infrastructure. We also talked about different programs that would assist the critical productive sectors, tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, all of which would make us more resilient in terms of importation of items, food security, things like that. So I'd have to say that at this point, the budget talks about a lot of these things. It promises things that will make us more resilient. There is no guarantee that we're that much more resilient than we were a year ago. So let's just say that it's still debatable and the options are out there.
Mr. Chair, with respect to the investment climate and whatnot, I'm hoping that it's not in a state of overcoming and that it's actually doing quite well. What do you say to the investment climate? Persevering?
Okay, yeah. In terms of the investment climate, what has been surprising, though, is that from the advent of COVID, there seemed to be a lot more interest in St. Lucia as an investment climate, as an investment destination. I'm not sure whether that has to do with perhaps promotions or the name of St. Lucia on the tourism standpoint, but there just seemed to be a lot more interest. And for our pipeline to actually grow during this period of time, it speaks volumes to the confidence that the FDI, the investors have in St. Lucia. In terms of resilience from the investor in Lucia standpoint, with the advent of COVID, what you found is that a lot of the promotion efforts now had to move online. And I think we all very familiar with Zoom, and I think perhaps a little more than a year ago, if you ask the majority of people what Zoom, they wouldn't know, right? So things have had to change, but the thing is, in order to survive, we have had to change. I think one of the things that Mr. Peterkin was talking about earlier, and Mr. Boland about tourism, what COVID taught us up front is the impact of tourism, the interconnectedness of tourism to the other sectors of the economy. Like it or not, that is it. Everyone suffered as a result. But what it also told us too is that there has always been a lot of talk about diversifying the economy away from tourism. Now we have to take it seriously. We have had to survive with reduced numbers of visitors, and in some cases no visitors for about a year now. And talking about resilience, we are still here. However, we have to take diversification of the economy away from tourism a lot more seriously.
All right. Thank you very much. We are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will be joined by the Director of Finance, who is going to speak to the global and regional context. See you in a minute. Thank you.
The BioIntelliSense Bio Button, an innovation to the Ministry of Health's approach in battling COVID-19. The Bio Button is a state-of-the-art device. It supports people keeping regular checks of signs of possible COVID-19 infection while placed in home quarantine. It monitors temperature, heart rate, and respiratory rate. It is very simple. Just link it to your smartphone and place the button on your chest. It's that easy. The Bio Button costs only $100 US for the 14-day period. For further information, please contact the Epidemiology Unit at 468-5325 or 468-5324.
Do you know we can limit the spread of the COVID-19 virus? The Ministry of Health is your partner in achieving this solution. Introducing the Amber Wristwatch. The Amber Wristwatch is designed for monitoring daily movements while in quarantine. It provides an accurate location and a precise heart rate. The device is also waterproof and can be worn during all daily functions like washing the dishes or taking a shower. It's worn like a typical timepiece. The Ministry of Health can now better monitor people in home quarantine and receive alerts of those who do not stay in the confines of their home. A 14-day rental of the Amber Wristwatch is just $75 US. Let us stop the breaches of home quarantine.
Good evening and welcome back to the 2021-22 budget review. We are now joined by the Director of Finance, and we are going to get her perspective with respect to how challenging was it to coordinate this year's budget in light of not only the rebound from COVID-19 but also some of the issues with respect to vaccination and the multitude of different requests that came in from various ministries and what have you. So, Director of Finance, welcome to the program, and just share with us your thoughts with respect to this year's budget.
Good afternoon to everyone. Mr. Leos, thank you for having me. This is a very interesting occasion to be here right after the debate in the House, where the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance presented his policy intention for this coming fiscal year. Last year, like we would all agree, was one of the most challenging periods for not just St. Lucia, but the region and the world. During 2020, we saw a number of shocks, I would say, from the pandemic. Primary of this would be the shortfall in government revenues. We, based on our assessments to date, would have assessed approximately 50% of government revenue would have been lost due to the pandemic. Coming with that would be increased expenditure requirements for the healthcare system to help combat the pandemic and minimize the spread of the virus. Also, along with these two measures or occurrences, we saw less than ideal uptake of our debt instruments both under our GSM and, of course, with private individuals and entities. So, Mr. Leos, you saw a series of things interplaying at the same time, adding a lot of pressure on the government's revenue. The government was mandated to raise revenue just over $1 billion, but based on our review of the performance of 2020, we did not meet that target. So we raised just over $900 million. And along with that, we had a turnover of our debt instruments in the region of 75%, and that suggests or means that you would have had to cater for additional 175 million in that region for persons who wanted to cash in the debt instruments. They did not choose to stay with the government's investment, and they would likely need liquidity themselves to continue managing their own affairs. So our turnover was about 75%, meaning we had a take out of about 25% in that region. Another observation during that same year, Mr. Leos and my esteemed panelists, would be the increase in our payables. So our payables is just a category of expenditure that speaks to amounts owed to private individuals domestically for works done or goods or services procured or provided for the government's use. So that typically would be in the region of $20 to $30 million at the end of any fiscal year. But between the end of 2019 and the end of 2020, we saw an increase to over $100 million. So essentially that's liquidity that we hold owing to individuals and entities. They themselves are in need of cash, but we are trying hard to ensure that we manage this process very delicately going forward. What we have done in terms of the payables would be to do some offsets between what's owed to the government in tax revenue and other contributions, and we would offset this against what we owe to these individuals and entities. So for the greater part, that has worked really well, and we hope to continue this strategy going forward. So increasing our payables, reduction in our revenue, greater than normal turnover or rollover of our bonds, all made it very challenging to manage the fiscal year. So we were pleased to have the intervention of international financial institutions such as the World Bank, the IMF, CDB, EIB, and several others who came to our aid and support, and they provided for us highly concessional loans and in some cases grant funding for us to be able to manage our affairs and ensure we paid salaries on time every month, and also ensure that we paid our debt obligations to other entities. So that's just a snapshot of what 2020 looked like as a result of COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Director of Finance. Now, earlier in the program, we would have touched on the global and regional context. We are now delving into the weeds, as it were, in terms of looking at the numbers that sort of underpin the budget. The Director of Finance would have touched a bit on the revenue and a bit on the expenditure numbers related to last year's budget. But we're going to shift focus a bit and touch on this year's 2021-22 budget. One of the issues covered in this year's budget was the whole matter of the payables, which are approximately in the region of 100 million thereabout. I just wanted to get a sense from the panelists, how would they advise that payables of that level be treated with, and what are some of the economic implications that they see with respect to that level of payables and the extent to which that the state can treat with lowering that to much more prudential levels. Mr. Peterkin, what are your thoughts with respect to that?
You know, when I was at university and we were doing finance, we had a prof that used to say the cheapest credit in the world is payables, 0%, right? Unless people, you know, want to charge you, and even though people may say they'll charge you interest, they never do. So let's face it, I mean, a build-up in payables, whether it be in the private or the public sector, is a problem. It's a real problem because it affects companies' ability to operate. And a lot of them, the smaller businesses in particular, are the ones that are affected by this because they don't have bank facilities to allow them to carry through a period where their receivables from government are heavy. So I don't think, to my knowledge, it's ever been as high as 100 million. But I'll also say, because of the options that government had, I'm not really sure they had too much of an option in that regard. If they were going to pay public sector salaries, as they did every single month, and meet other critical payments, debt repayments, etc., it had to come from somewhere. And you can't go and borrow money from the IMF just to meet your payables. So to that extent, they had to use that as a policy with the hope that it would come back down to normal levels. But it is a problem. It is affecting smaller businesses, and the quicker that can be addressed with an overall fiscal policy that, you know, ensures you can make the payments that have to be made, cuts back wherever you can, but tries to reduce those payables, the quicker the better.
Thank you, Mr. Peterkin. Mr. Boland, as a banker, what do you think of that level of payables, and what will be some of your recommendations in terms of how you treat with that?
So I too think, it's the level is high. It's understandably so, given the context that we're in. But as Richard says, it's impacting persons who may be those small players in the economy. What can we do to facilitate? I mean, as PS Robert indicated, the take-up of the regional bond market seems to be a little slower than you all would like. But I think there's still a lot of liquidity in the local economy. And we have to find ways that this can be tapped into to see how best they can. A phased approach would be something I would be looking to see if they would look to try and see how, okay, if it is that we can look at a certain number of further bonds this quarter and then do so over a period of time to try and bring that down.
If you can just butt in, hopefully we can butt in from time to time.
Yeah, no problem.
One of the concerns I have is that the banks have been very good in terms of their moratoriums.
No.
And that has been the most significant thing for a lot of businesses, not having to pay their bank loans for an extended period. Those moratoria are coming to an end.
Right.
And so it now means that, all of those that have been able to at least get by because of that, because the private sector has got absolutely no bailouts or anything like that in this entire period. We've had to fend on our own. And so to that extent, you're going to find a lot of businesses, particularly smaller ones, now even more dependent on getting paid on time. And the pressure is all around, whether it's within the private sector as well. I mean, government is not the only one that racked up payables. The private sector did as well. We all paid essential payments, and we told everybody else either you take a cut or you hold back. So it was across the board. But you can only do so for so long. And then after a while it becomes gridlock, and the whole thing grounds to a halt. So, we're getting to that critical point with moratoriums coming to an end where those issues have to be addressed.
Thank you for those comments. So, Director of Finance, given that context, what are some of your thoughts with respect to that, and how do the IFI communities come into play in the 2021-2022 budget? We do note in the budget that it has an expenditure of approximately $1.6 billion thereabout, and revenues that are still below the levels that we saw in the 2019 or even the 2018 budget periods. During 2020, we saw a lot of assistance from your IFI community, international financial institutions, that is. Are we expected to see international financial assistance in the 2021-2022 budget? And if so, what type of investments or assistance can one expect?
Thank you. What we saw in 2020 in terms of IFI assistance, it was commendable and unprecedented in many ways. And we don't expect that level of concessional borrowings to small countries like St. Lucia. However, we know we have the support of the World Bank and IMF in terms of bilateral engagements. We would have benefited last year, 2020, from what's called debt suspension initiative of the World Bank and the IMF, along with bilateral agencies and countries. So that came in quite handy. We got some debt suspension. It means that we defer those payments to a later fiscal period. We don't expect that level of support in that regard this year. However, the expiry of those debt suspensions would have been June, and there is discussion currently ongoing to defer that to a later time this coming fiscal year. So if we do get that, it will provide some liquidity and fiscal space. The World Bank in its economic outlook projects a growth of 3.3% thereabout for 2021. And so if things pan out in that regard, we expect revenues to improve. Once revenues improve, it means we would have adequate liquidity to clear up some of the payables, in addition to the regular monthly recurrent expenditure of salaries, goods and services, and debt obligations. And even 2022, they project a growth rate of about 11%. So it's looking up in terms of recovery. Notwithstanding, we are very mindful of the fiscal pressures on small businesses. Currently, out of the payable stock, about 15% of that goes to contractors. So it means these are small contractors that did works for the government and await their payment. Some of the others would be for institutions that we have obligations to. The commendation and recommendation, from both Mr. Peter Kane and Mr. Boland in terms of, trying to release those funds into the economy, we are very mindful of that. So in addition to some additional offsets for tax liabilities, we will be trying to reduce the payables. We will be getting 2 loans are about to be disbursed to St. Lucia. One would be from the from ROCT, Republic of China and Taiwan, as well as from the World Bank. So that's to be received anytime from now, and that would certainly provide some space for the government to manage its expenditures. So I'm confident that we will be able to reduce that huge stock of payables over the next few months, and we just want to appeal to the public, particularly the small contractors, to bear with us a little as we try to undertake that that clearing of our payables.
Thank you.
I think
Mr. Boland, sure, come in.
One of the things that I've seen that I do commend the government for is a sort of PPP arrangements that they have entered into, with some of their contractors. And, they've leveraged on the design build finance, again, to stretch out that sort of need to have the payables, instantly due. So it's something that I'm seeing that there's a need to consider that. I would encourage that as well, to alleviate the immediate need for cash outlays.
Thank you, Mr. Boland. And in this segment, we are delving into the weeds of the budget, as it were, with respect to the numbers that underpin the budget. One of the numbers that we saw was the deficit. So in this year's budget, we are estimating a deficit of just over $500 million, which by historical standards is relatively large, given the expectations on the revenue front and also the levels of expenditure, which is in the region of $1.6 billion. Mr. Boland, the question to you, though, do you see the size of the deficit influencing the activity in any way? We are going to answer that as soon as we come back from the break. My apologies. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Thank you very much.
You're eating, do you really even know all the chemicals and hormones used to accelerate their growth? All the artificial flavoring, sweeteners and colors too. We consume and we don't spare a thought for the damage that they'll do. No, think about the children. Think about the children. How will we say that? Chemicals and GMOs are not the solution. Use organic and join revolution.
Excessive agrochemical use, additives and genetically modified foods are harmful to health and the environment. Join the good food revolution. Grow, buy and consume organic. A message from Rise St. Lucia and the Ministry of Sustainable Development with funding from the GEF Small Grants Program, UNDP.
The good food revolution.
Do you know we can limit the spread of the COVID-19 virus? The Ministry of Health is your partner in achieving this solution. Introducing the Amber Wristwatch. The Amber Wristwatch is designed for monitoring daily movements while in quarantine. It provides an accurate location and a precise heart rate. The device is also waterproof and can be worn during all daily functions like washing the dishes or taking a shower. It's worn like a typical timepiece. The Ministry of Health can now better monitor people in home quarantine and receive alerts of those who do not stay in the confines of their home. A 14-day rental of the Amber wristwatch is just $75 US. Let us stop the breaches of home quarantine.
Good evening, viewers, and welcome to the 2021-22 budget review. We are joined by a panel of private and public sector individuals who are quite versed with issues related to taxation, public financial management, and also banking. Just before the break, we were speaking to the deficit that is in the 2021-2022 budget and the extent to which that can or does not impact economic activity, and also the investment climate as well. Mr. Boland, any thoughts on the deficit and what it means for the economy going forward?
Sure. So that size of deficit is of concern, but at the same time, it's necessary for us to be able to, first of all, for the stabilization of the economy and for the transformation that we are seeking. Yeah. So when we see, we are undertaking activities in terms of our infrastructure, which will be serve well in our resilience, as well as, positioning us for the growth that we expect going forward. We see it as being able to provide jobs for persons. We're seeing that, it's now causing us to be in a position that will allow us to attract more investments. Okay. And I think that is one of the key things that we need, so that once we can see the level of investments that undertake will increase productivity, and that productivity will then spur economic growth. We do have to be cognizant of the fact that, we cannot continuously just increase our debt stock, but we have to now say, okay, at what point do we start looking at resilient measures? The government has identified through CIP and various other income streams that we will be creating a fund that will now allow us to build on that for resilience.
Thank you very much. And we do have a question from our Facebook audience. I'm just going to put that question to the panelists and allow either one of them to answer it. So the question reads that the tourism sector has been the driving force of growth in St. Lucia. However, that sector has been highly vulnerable to external shocks and natural disasters. How would you recommend tourism-based economies such as St. Lucia get the right balance between growth and risk? I'll leave that question open, and who wishes to take a stab on that question first? Because there's been quite a lot of discussion with respect to tourism and how we transition.
It's an ongoing subject, and we're not going to hear the end of it, right? Because there were a lot of calls over the last year for more investment in agriculture, less of a dependence on tourism, etc., etc. The reality is that we are a tourism country. We are dependent on tourism. If we're going to make that change, if we're going to pivot, it's going to take time. It's not something we can do in a short pace, and certainly in the short term, our only hope for economic growth and a rebound is that we get our tourism markets up and running again. So, but lessons were learned, right? And even the tourist industry would be the first to say that they are going to do things differently. There's going to be a greater emphasis on health and on market and, on alternative energy and other resilient factors. Because they realize at the end of the day that they can't do it on their own. They need a government, they need a people, and so to that extent they must make changes. We are at the mercy of world tourism markets. There's very little we can do that is going to change them to accept what we're giving them. We, to a large extent, have to cater as much as possible to their demands, but we can pick and choose in terms of where we see the importance of the type of tourism that we want. And over the years, we have changed it more to higher-end tourism in the hope of getting more more money spent locally in the economy, etc. But certainly for the short term, the big impact now is going to be how we get basically our health situation in place. We may well get to the point where the providers that send tourists down here are going to be saying that you running a hotel, we're not coming on there unless your workers are vaccinated. Right. We don't have mandatory vaccinated here in St. Lucia. Right. We may have to change the labor code to allow private employers to make it a requirement of your employment, just to ensure that we can get that level. That's just one of many things. But bear in mind, in all of this, there was no bailout of private companies in tourism. They had to fend on their own, and they went in many cases from 100% to zero occupancy and money. And so they're now finding themselves heavily indebted to bankers. They got some moratoriums, and they're going to be running into problems, well, just managing through just like ordinary people are, as we recover. So they are as committed as the government is for this overall economy to recover, to get the workers back, to start buying more agriculture and more domestic manufacturing goods so that they can become a more integrated industry. But certain things, the infrastructure is important. Getting that airport up and running is important because it's the first thing people see and the last thing that they see. And so we want to make sure that, that at least the infrastructure is in place, and a lot of the other policies that were problematic are affected. Bear in mind, in all of this, tourism is now paying an extra tax in a sense, and that is the head tax that is being charged for people coming in. They have, discussed that with government and arrived at an accommodation that, okay, they will try to pass it on. And so they're doing their bit. It's a question of how, working together, we can now start to change our tourism, working with the hoteliers and government policies towards an industry that is more inclusive, more integrated with the economy, and clearly can remain a driver of our economic growth in the years ahead.
Thank you very much. Now, on the issue of tourism, one of the budget did speak to tourism in some depth, and the whole notion of village tourism was something that was raised in the budget in terms of strengthening village tourism and having that become more of a community-led affair. So you have a bottom-up approach, as it were. Any thoughts on that in the budget, and would you have liked to have seen more or that fleshed out a bit more? Any of the panelists want to touch on that question?
Okay, I'll start. Thank you. So the village tourism, as you would have heard articulated in the budget, is to really allow various communities to benefit from the tourism product. So you would agree that the greater share of the tourism dollar goes to well-established hotels and accommodation providers, and the typical small inn or guest house does not always get an opportunity to benefit from the tourism dollar for a number of reasons: capacity, appeal, the location. So the village tourism will be geared towards communities such as ancillary and some places, Grosile and canneries and so on. So really provide infrastructural amenities so that their individual accommodation is up to standard and can appeal to the average tourist. So that is going to be a game changer for tourism here. And just to add to what Mr. Peterkin explained earlier, there's no need to move away from tourism. It's really to re-engineer and reinvent tourism. Our very location in the Caribbean region makes us a tourism destination, whether we want to accept that or not, right? So being in the Caribbean region, close to North America and South America, Central American, positioned in terms of connections to Europe and so on, we would likely be a destination for persons wanting to travel for vacation and so on. So we need to really revisit what do we offer, what's the product we're offering, how can we restructure this so that we appeal to a wider cross-section of persons and to make it more robust and less susceptible to economic shocks. So diversification has to take a new meaning. It's not moving away, but really augmenting what we have already.
Thank you very much, Director of Finance. Now, just before we segue a bit into speaking to tourism, we were touching on the whole notion of cash flow, particularly for your private sector persons. And we have the managing director of the Sinusha Development Bank. Mr. Boland, do you want to touch a bit on some of the initiatives that the Sinusha Development Bank undertook with respect to cash flow, working capital and whatnot? Those were mentioned in the budget. Would you be in a position to give an update on those, how they have gone, and what are the expectations going forward?
So, I heard when Richard said earlier that there hasn't been much for the tourist sector, but what we did see, because the tourist sector is a private sector, they were able to shut down very quickly and try and control their expenditure. In instances, I presume they would have had to have held on to some of their better employees and so on. But for the majority, they cut their expenses very quickly and were able to try and contain the issue. From the bank's perspective, we have, as I indicated earlier, we have initiated the business recovery program. And in that business recovery program, we saw a number of persons knocking on our door from all sectors, looking for that support that we would be able to provide. And to date, we had about 119 persons inquiring, to the point where we have gotten to applications of $2.5 million. We have approvals. I think the approvals were at 1.5 million, and it touched not only just the tourist sector. It's broad. It's persons from farms to preschools to hair salons to restaurants, tour guides, other service providers, all of them benefiting from the services that we provided. A lot of the sort of hindrances that persons would have seen in this particular program is what the World Bank would have placed on us. The World Bank would have said, listen, you must have a business plan to be able to know what you're going to do. Now, when you think of a smaller business, of micro enterprises, to get the business plan, he has to go to Richard and pay a certain amount to allow him to be able to do that.
I'm very cheap.
Well, there you go. But for some of them, there was reluctance, and we had to walk them through. And some of them, it just took longer than they would have liked. And then the World Bank also said, well, listen, they must be able to show that they had a 30% decline in their business, in their revenue. Now, again, the small business, we are at, I think it's a great juncture that we're at, meaning that it brings to the fore what our businesses need to do to move forward. I spent a long time in corporate and commercial banking, and one of our biggest challenges was even well-established businesses to get them to produce financial statements on a timely basis. Now, when you take that further to the smaller businesses, that they have everything in their head, some may have it in a notebook, but for them to translate that to you now, for you to provide assistance to them, it's highlighted that tremendously. So we have initiated programs where we're working with the Chamber of Commerce, we're working with the Small Business Unit, we're working with even our friends at the German Savings Foundation to be able to get people to understand the basics, business plan, basic bookkeeping. The Chamber recently, we had an activity, just looking at the lean model, so that persons the lean canvas model, so people can, in a simplistic way, identify what drives their business, how to record, how do you generate information in terms of your revenue, what are your expenses looking like, and be able to share that information with the bank so that we now can be able to assist. We have seen that one of the biggest things, that the requirements, was for persons to have a business continuity plan. And I think, if anything else, that in itself has caused a lot of businesses, when they did come to the sessions that we had, when they left, they said, this has really highlighted a lot of things for them. Not just for COVID, not just for, the times we're in now, but for any eventuality. Because there will be other things. God forbid if we have a hurricane this year, persons will be impacted and their businesses again will see, okay, how do I get to see that turnaround? So that has allowed them to say, some of them to say, oh, even if I come to you, Mr. Boland, at the bank, can I now just have a fund where a facility that will allow me to create a fund so that going forward I can have something to depend on. So they're seeing their cash flows that which would allow them to say, okay, let me put aside $20,000 to be able to tap into in the future if I need to. Yeah, and these types of things are now causing us to have a more a better understanding of how to conduct our business.
Right. And just to touch on that point, the notion of financial accounts or the lack thereof of financial accounts hindering the ability to access finance. Mr. Peterkin, just from you as someone trained in tax audit and what have you, what do you see as some of the things that's contributing to that sort of perennial problem? And is it for subsequent budget addresses to really get to the heart of that and to craft policies that can treat with that? Because we have heard of lack of financial accounts and so forth, and access to finance being limiters. Does this year's budget touch on that? And if it does not, what should be done?
The budget doesn't address it, but specifically. It has been a problem over the years. It's partly cultural. There are certain sectors that just don't believe that it's necessary. It's partly because there's a cost, and some people can't afford it. What we're beginning to see is the market, as usual, is coming in, and more people that are doing business on their, smaller accountants, smaller consultants, offering services. I can't talk for the banks, and I don't know if it has improved. But it's something that's important because, we're getting into new legislation that is going to be impacted by that. And, companies doing business with banks are going to have to be a lot more careful in providing information to make sure that they don't run into problems and the banks understand where they're going. The new legislation that we're talking about, one of them is the new Insolvency Act, which is going to make the whole issue of dealing with companies that are insolvent, instead of having to go into receivership or liquidation, appoint trustees who try to work out a solution so that the bank and the creditors are satisfied and the business can continue to run. And that's big, but that could only work if you're getting a much higher and better level of financial information flowing between the parties. So that's one. The second, and this should be of interest to people that are saying that, look, whenever I go to borrow money at a bank, they ask me for my house or a piece of land. All they want is property as security, and I don't have it. I've already given it up. So now they've come up with a new security interest bill that will allow you to borrow based on your movables. So you have equipment, you have other stuff that you can provide as security. It has to be registered, not a big cost. It's not like registering houses and land. So that the lenders are aware that, okay, there's something there. I'll take a risk, but at least I know that he can't go to another person and borrow money there. That's not unique to St. Lucia. It happens all over the world. So those are the things that are being put out there to try and assist in the monies that is basically tied up in the banking system. With all of the problems we have had, we still have a huge liquidity in the banking system. And the question is, how do we get that into use? We don't expect banks to give away and drop their requirements and take on too much risk. They need to have proper risk control and security over the assets. But at the same time, we need to get that money moving. We don't want all of that money simply lent to government either. Government needs to know to live within its means. So you want other people to have access to capital, the people that really need it, small businesses, innovators, and they are now going to be in a better position to do so. They will have to have that financial information. So I'm hoping that companies like ours and that will start coming up with new programs that will assist people in putting together simpler types of financial statements, bearing in mind that we all have to deal with what we call international standards, and that requires it must be done in a certain way. Otherwise, they're not reliable. So it's how we work that out, and you're going to find people like the Institute of Accountants and some of the others, the Chamber, small business, hopefully getting into the act to come up with templates and ways in which people can get better information to the bankers, to the creditors, so that cash will start moving in the society.
And just if I might add, thank you, Mr. Peter King, you highlighted two important legislative reforms that's about to be rolled out. In addition to this, we have the credit reporting bill. It's gone to Parliament, and there is some further work to be done, but clearly these three pieces of legislation will provide an enabling environment for banks and financial institutions to lend to small businesses. I just wanted to add that I do agree, and evidence suggests there is adequate liquidity in the banking sector as well as the credit union subsector, but it's that lack of appetite to lend to small businesses, particularly in the tourism industry, and one can well appreciate why that would be so. We've started discussions with the banking sector in that regard to really get to understand what more would they need, apart from government guarantee and support. What more would they need to make them a little more inclined to lend into small businesses? I just want to provide an explanation to a statement made earlier. I did allude to a growth rate of 3.3%, but that's just for the Caribbean region. I think the world economic outlook for the entire world is 6%.
Yes.
I just wanted to put that in context to clarify. It was just for the Caribbean region of 3.3% for 2021.
Not a problem, Director. Thank you.
Then I just, as you know, you spoke about unlocking capital and access to credit. What we have seen is, for instance, the government has supported the Eastern Caribbean Partial Credit Guarantee Program, and I'm pleased to say that the Synergy Development Bank has just signed up onto it. We are going through a training process now with our staff, and we are looking to roll it out at the beginning of May, where persons will be able to access facilities utilizing the partial credit guarantee program up to 75% of the loan requirement. And there's also a startup component, and there is a working capital component. So it provides, some sort of additional comfort to the banks, because that's where the challenge has been, where you aren't able to move on your security as you would have liked, which keeps a level of non-performing loans that causes you to either you're financing this and you now have to pass that cost on to the individuals, and some people will say, well, why are we paying more for for this? So this, we think, will again cause a stimulation into the economy. Our colleagues across the street have signed up to it already, but we are now coming. It is something because they were a licensed institution that they were, given this facility first. But we did make enough representation that allowed for the Development Bank to also be able to access the partial credit guarantee program.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are due for a break, and as you can see, it's quite an interesting discussion. There are quite a number of questions from the Facebook page as well. I will prepare the panelists for those by just highlighting those questions just before we take a break. One of the key questions is, how does the budget affect the common man on the street? Another speaks to vaccination and the extent to which vaccination actually now can increase optimism and economic activity. And we also have a few questions with respect to the cannabis industry. So quite a bit of questions. Keep them coming in. When we return from the break, we are going to touch on those Facebook Live questions. And we're also now going to delve into the second half of the program on the policies that were contained in the budget. We spoke to the context, economic and otherwise. We spoke a bit to the numbers. In the coming segments, we are going to speak to the policies and also answer your questions. I am Janai Leos, Chief Economist in the Department of Finance. We'll see you after the break. Thank you.
St. Lucia continues to lead the way in efforts to make access rights to environmental information a reality for all its citizens. To this end, it has ratified the Escazú Agreement and welcomed its official entry into force on April 22nd, which is celebrated worldwide as International Mother Earth Day. This regional agreement will guarantee every person, present and future generation, the right to a healthy environment. Ever guided by the principles on equality and non-discrimination, this human rights treaty will protect those who defend the environment, give special attention to vulnerable persons and groups, ensure that everyone is involved at all stages of the decision-making process when it comes to projects and activities that impact the environment and our health. As an environmental agreement, it will strengthen community engagement in finding solutions to cross-cutting issues like land degradation, biodiversity loss, water pollution, and climate change. So join us as we begin to put in place framework for the effective implementation of our Escazú Agreement. This land is ours. Let us rally together to make St. Lucia sustainable for all.
Good evening and thank you for returning. We are discussing the 2021-22 budget, and with me is a section of panelists from the Department of Finance, the St. Lucia Development Bank, and also the private sector. We were initially joined by the CEO of Invest St. Lucia, but he had to take a leave of absence. But the three panelists who will remain are more than willing and able to discuss the issues on hand. We were discussing earlier issues with respect to cash flow, and also we were highlighting a few questions from our Facebook page. One of those questions asked, what is in the budget for the average or common man? Director of Finance, you want to touch a bit on that? And we also have a few questions with respect to the vaccination campaign and how that impacts economic activity and optimism going forward. But Director?
Thank you. So I think it's important to reiterate that the budget for an expenditure of 1.6 billion and your revenue just over 1 billion, you know, naturally we would have a financing gap of in the region of 500 million. So with that gap, it does not always allow the government, once you have such a huge fiscal gap, the government is kind of restrained in its ability to provide support to individuals, cash transfers, support to businesses, and so on. Notwithstanding that restraint or limitation, there are quite a lot in the budget. So a clear, easy, low-hanging fruit is no taxes. So usually your government expenditure is fueled by tax revenue in the main. But a decision was taken, a policy decision was taken not to increase any taxes. There will be one replacement tax measure, and that is the property tax for residential property owners. The last 5 years would have seen, or 4 years, this year being the fifth year, would have seen a waiver on the payment of property tax for all residential property owners, and that was on two fronts: to allow the government to come up with a more robust and efficient system, and also to give tax breaks to individuals. So that's one clear win for, let's say, all homeowners. Then in addition to this, the government would have started the implementation of a series of tax exemptions and concessions from residential or partial waiver for property owners, where they would have given moratoriums to the tenants. So that is being rolled out this coming fiscal year. You also have support to MSMEs, and Mr. Boland spoke to that. I think there are 2 interventions are being executed through the St. Lucia Development Bank, and we heard about the partial guarantee scheme, which is not stated in the budget, but it's a commitment the government gave even as far back as 2019-2020. When you look at the different expenditures, you would see there's an increase in expenditures on several major government deliverables: education, security, healthcare, and that these are services accessed by every St. Lucian, every person, whether it be child of school age, their parents' households. These are measures that will benefit the average St. Lucian. You know of the ICT program. There's a rollout of DigiGov, and with that enhanced forum to conduct business with the government, that will save both money, time, and would bring about greater efficiency. So we're talking about over 30 services to be launched on DigiGov. Currently, a few have been rolled out. So these are supported by the budget. I don't know if anybody, feel free to interject as I go through some of the key highlights of the budget. We spoke about village tourism a little earlier. Yes. So communities such as Soufrière, Grosile, Ancillary, and Canneries would see improvements in the waterfront, the public amenities of washroom and toilet facilities. The government will ensure that the environment and infrastructure allows for the tourism product to be vibrant and for persons to benefit from the tourism dollar. So these are just a few quick ones that come readily to mind, but I'm sure we can highlight a few others as we proceed.
Not a problem, and thank you, Director of Finance. One of the key questions before we move on to some of the other issues: how do we, or what is in the budget to sort of ensure and build up our resiliency? Resiliency was one of the issues that was discussed earlier, and we do know that shocks happen, and COVID-19 and what we are seeing in St. Vincent are clear examples of that. Anything in the budget, Director, that speaks to resiliency, or at least going forward, we could build that resiliency, particularly on the fiscal side?
Okay, thank you again, Janai. I want to speak to resilience to climate change first and foremost. And small but important measure is to donate water tanks that came under the Economic Recovery Plan. So these are small measures you allow for persons to store water and to be more agile when it comes to mitigating, let's say, bad weather conditions and hurricanes and storms. The government has a very extensive project implementation that's been rolled out at this point in time. And the question often comes, why is the government spending so much money on capital projects? But it's all about making your infrastructure more robust, more resilient for disasters, and to increase your capacity. The airport, for instance, the redevelopment of HIA, it's not just to develop for a more aesthetically pleasing structure, but to allow for a greater intake of visitors in any one day, and at any one point in time we can accommodate a lot more visitors with better facilities. And of course we expect increased employment and generation of consumption and economic activity. So resilience building is multifaceted. It's your healthcare system where you are improving your healthcare distributed through your community facilities as well as your main hospitals. The government is trying to advance and complete the St. Jude's reconstruction project. We talk about healthcare tourism. So if you have an up-to-date, modern, top-of-the-line facility, you can appeal to tourists who want to come both for vacation and healthcare, medical care. Lots of St. Lucians have to travel to neighboring islands for treatment of health issues. And if that's here found locally, you're also making it more accessible by all, and it comes at a lower cost. So resilience is your healthcare system, your education system, where you're able to deliver education to persons regardless of whether it's in person or via virtual platforms, and equipping your teachers and educators to be able to do so and make good use of time and the technology. So it's all around your infrastructure, education system, your healthcare, as well as your physical infrastructure.
Thank you, Director of Finance. Now, before we went to the break, we were touching on the issue with respect to cash flow and related matters. And Mr. Peterkin, I believe you wanted to chime in and just add a bit more in terms of fleshing that out.
Yeah, you know, the Prime Minister touched on it, but in the budget, when he mentioned the fact that he was appreciative of the fact that so many businesses in the country retain their staff. Did not, there weren't people out there in the streets unemployed. Hotels had no choice. There was nobody coming. And in so doing, he offered an incentive in that regard. But businesses did this because they have a bond with their staff, and their hope was that they would, in essence, get over this. Some of them had to adjust the staff slightly, in the salary slightly, and some had to use overdraft to kind of do it, and they still do. And to some extent, I think, perhaps not enough acknowledgement has been given to what the private sector companies have been able to do. And there are some things that now can be done quite easily that would both benefit government and the local domestic economy when it comes to that, because cash flow is important, and the businesses here are suffering problems with their cash flow in the same way that the government is. One person coming in told me actually that whenever businesses need cash flow, they have a sale, which is true. And government has lots of property for sale, so maybe they should consider that. But there are a couple of small things that they could do that would bring in money and would really assist. People still find they have arrears. They've been trying their best. In the process, the arrears is building up because interest is charged in a revenue of 12%, and whatever you owe. And so it becomes huge. From time to time, government has announced an amnesty, and every time they do that, money flows in, right? And so here's a case where we're saying people are willing to pay off a lot of those debts. If they get a break in respect of the interest and penalties, government will get more cash at the end result. Sometimes you never even see that money. So to that extent, a kind of a one-year amnesty might be very useful and some of this is coming from my Institute of Accountants, who has talked about this, and they're seeing. The other thing is that when you talk about the financial statements, in this country you need to lead by example. And who has the slowest and oldest in terms of getting out their financial statement? The government of St. Lucia. Their financial statements are years in arrears, right? They don't adopt the latest standards that governments all over the world do. And I understand the problems as to, and it hasn't prevented them from operating. But it really would be useful for the people in St. Lucia to be able to say, this is a financial statement of the government. These are the assets they have, and all we see is a budget. It says what you're going to spend and what you're going to get in a given year. So when you passed the Finance Administration Act, it clearly said that financial statements would be produced within 1 year. And so, again, we could have talked about that in the budget when we said, we need to make changes as a people. We need to understand that the culture has to change. People have to get more responsible and accountable. And we as a government will take the lead. And we will give you the assurance that these are the things that will be done in a given spate of time. So you will be a lot more familiar. For example, you can explain the budget more, and you will talk about later what they are doing. And people will now begin to feel, yes, they're truly connected to the government is doing the things that we should be doing.
Can I just add that? Thank you. I just want to reassure. Free tax advice. Yes, thank you. So Mr. Peterkin is correct. So the government's financial statements are not up to date, but it's something that we are purposefully undertaking to bring those financial statements up to date. So there is currently an initiative to ensure that in the next year or two, everything would be up to date. So I do agree. Government has to set by example, and it's a cultural thing, both, limitations of I guess, manpower and competing priorities, but we need to set by example. So there is currently work afoot in that regard.
All right, thank you. Just to add, I've sat on meetings with the World Economic Forum, and the government is mapping out a country financing roadmap, which will require us to be able to identify the assets and all of those wonderful things that Mr. Peterkin, would like to see. I think it's a great step in the right direction. It is going to lead to us now identifying how do we build on that level of resiliency that we need. Yeah, because as we indicated, yes, debt is required for us to be able to finance our operations, capital and recurrent. But at the same time, having a clearly defined map, which I saw a level of eagerness coming from our strategic partners, and that is something that really
it highlights the strong relationship that the government has developed with those economic partners, the World Bank, the CDB, and the likes. So I'm quite pleased that we are moving in the right direction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bolin. As we enter the last 30 minutes of this discussion, there's sort of 3 areas that we are going to try to delve into, and that has to do with the specific policies that were outlined in the budget. The budget had quite a bit with respect to infrastructure, both physical and human, and also with respect to renewable energy, and also in crime and the whole issue of crime and what have you. So we're going to use the last 30 minutes of this discussion to really delve into those areas. But before we do, one of the Facebook comments spoke to the cannabis industry. And did the budget really touch on that industry? And if so, do you see that as an oversight that should be corrected?
I can't remember seeing anything in the budget, but there was something just before the budget that had said that the recommendations of the commission that had been formed had been taken into consideration, that the government was proceeding along certain lines, and which would involve decriminalization as a priority, as well as regulated use of cannabis. So that's good, and there's been a lot of talk about this for years. I mean, I think the let's just say the value of that industry may be a little exaggerated, because we're not going to find ourselves overnight exporting marijuana in vast amounts. But it is going to allow farmers to get into a crop that if it can be regulated properly and used responsibly, that will bring some income in when nothing is coming in now. So I think the one issue there is government takes so long to change regulations and to institute things that they've promised. And so to some extent now, as the Prime Minister says, the time is now. And we now need to start doing these things. If you're going to do it now. You've got everything there. The Commission has given you a roadmap, regulation, that can be changed. Stuff tends to take too long in certain departments before it actually gets out. So we have a chance to make that a small thing, but a meaningful thing, and something that will make a lot of people in this country happy. But do it cautiously, because there are some concerns of young people abusing marijuana and how it affects them. So we need to be aware, just as abusing alcohol, we need to be aware of these concerns and address those concerns.
Thank you very much. The budget focused a lot on infrastructure, and in addition to some of your core infrastructure, construction-related infrastructure, it also spoke to ICT, and I really want to get the thoughts of the panelists with respect to how ICT can be used as a catalyst for economic growth going forward. Mention was made to the DigiGov initiative. Mention was also made to the extent to which you have the Republic of China and Taiwan assisting with the GINet program and whatnot to ensure that access to the internet is there for all. And you also had the Ministry of Education and whatnot with quite an extensive ICT rollout with respect to ebooks and what have you. I will just ask the panelists what their thoughts are with respect to ICT economic growth, and whether the budget spoke to those issues in sufficient depth, and if there are any areas for change, what are their thoughts with respect to that? Mr. Bowen, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that what the government is laying out, it will be the groundwork that will allow persons, because what it will do is it will increase knowledge and the application and the education where we can apply that now to production. And so we're hoping that once persons can grab on to the need for enhanced technology and the use of it, we will see improvements in production and therefore overall economic growth. Yeah, I think that we have seen in areas, I mean, COVID brought it out instantly, that people had to move online just for meetings to ensure that they could have the smooth running of their operations. There was a need for that. So everybody jumped onto the Zoom calls that we spoke about earlier and so on. And now we're seeing the business sector themselves having to say, okay, grab and go, order online, curbside pickup. All of these things are spin-offs of the enhanced ITC promotion that's been undertaken. And the fact that we now going to allow for an enhancement of that, looking at even the resource centers throughout St. Lucia, having, allowing persons to have greater access. We're seeing the Ministry of Education, doing the best they can in terms of getting devices into people's hands. So all of these will cause an improvement, as it were, in our overall production and therefore enhance our economic activity.
Thank you. Director, any thoughts with respect to ICT?
Well, yes, thank you. So there's this project, World Bank project, Caribbean Digital Transformation, which has both a domestic component and a regional component. And that is expected to revolutionize how we conduct business for the public sector as well as private sector. So we talk about farmers, for instance, trying to get a market for their produce, but they do not leverage technology to do so. Yes, we saw a little introduction of that where you have the curbside pickup and so on, but part of that would be to educate the masses, to ensure there are adequate software and hardware available to the average solution in centers where everybody can access, and to ensure that it's used for their business. So if you're a farmer, you should be able to use technology to sell your produce, to get inputs, to make transfers to other parties, and to receive payments. So that's the way we need to take, that's the direction we are going as a government, and we were getting the support of the World Bank in terms of the transformation project.
Right, thank you. In terms of this, keeping on the issue of ICT, while it was not explicitly mentioned in the budget, you do have initiatives such as the one by the ECCB, where you have your digital cash platforms, and you also have some private sector firms enter the digital payment space. Mr. Peterkin, do you see those as revolutionary in terms of, one, there being an increased use of ICT, and secondly, there being an increased use of digital payment platforms? And how does your accounting system treat with those sorts of online systems?
Well, it's critical to us. I mean, one of the things when we all had to work from home, and we've never turned back. 60% of our people remain working from home, and it'll be like that for a long time. But that can't happen unless they are all trained, and we have the platform in the office that can ensure that people can transfer files to and from, and there's still confidentiality. So it is critical, and the issue with ICT, and there's a lot about ICT in the budget. Digital transformation is clearly one of the policies of the government, and has been, for years. But it's important that we ramp it up, because it's not just about technology any longer. You can get cheap iPads, you can get cheap whatever you need. The important thing is training people, educating them how to use it. You can give a kid a laptop or a portable, and then assume they're going to know what to do with it at the end of the day. They have to be trained. So as somebody was pointing out to me, in Jamaica, for example, they have a program for preschools. It's called Future Kids, and that begins training from the kids from the age of 3. Oh. Now Jamaica is a Caribbean leader in digital transformation, and that has proved to their great benefit in terms of how to do work and the services they give to, so because if you're going to move away from tourism and you can't get additional exports in agriculture, its services is going to pick up the slack. Yeah. And so that's why it's so important, and it really and truly takes education to allow us to take advantage of all the new stuff that you can now get at a reasonable price, in order for us to really and truly say. And here's the thing, when people talk about ease of doing business all the time, as if it's only for businesses. This should be for us as people. Yeah. We want to be the ones to be able to do business. Why should we have to go to to union to get a driver's license, right? Or to do changes which everywhere else in the world now you can do online. So the government did mention that another 150 services are going to be made available to citizens, and that's excellent. The more the merrier. I mean, you can build protections to make sure it's not abused. But the ability to be able to stay in your home, whether it's DigiCash is an excellent, it's not revolutionary, but it's about time we had it. It's only going to be 2 banks so far, and whichever businesses pick it up. But right now, my wife is the one paying all the bills in the house, and she's doing it all online, which wasn't happening before. So it's going to change our habits. So this is a crisis that is, forced us all to adapt, and solutions have shown that they are capable of making that adaptation, and the government is hopefully now making that easier with a wide area network so people can get online wherever they are, and the education. That is the key to the whole thing working.
Thank you. If I can just do a quick add-on. There's some facilities that's been in use but not widely used by our average person or solution. We have e-filing, for instance, electronic filing for your taxes, and you can do so in the comfort of your home, but it's not widely used. We have a very low intake of the e-filing, and we now are ensuring that in locations that traditionally you would not be able to make your payments, you can make those payments both for customs duties and your income taxes. So there is move afoot to ensure we have a more robust technology framework for persons to do business with the government.
And revenue can pay you back as well for the refunds.
Well, yes, certainly. That would be an additional component. Where
but you know, all kids, every kid in Solution knows how to use a mobile phone.
Yeah.
And they have skilled at doing that. I see them tapping on the phone. It take me 10 minutes to do it, so I've got it on my computer. If they can do it on a phone, they can do it on a computer. So it's not difficult to train and to give them that ability.
And we did see in the budget some talk with respect to human capital enhancements, where you saw measures put in place with respect to your care facility and the expansion of that facility, and also other human resource sort of issues with respect to your TVEC program and whatnot. Do you think that those TVEC type programs are sufficient, or do we need a completely new paradigm if we are to see, to Mr. Peterkin's point, that revolution that Jamaica has been able to achieve? Mr. Boland, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, my thoughts on TVET may be slightly different, meaning that I think that we need to have, an enhancement of the TVET program. That will look at certain sectors that we really want to promote. The government has identified in this this budget, their focus on housing and the creation of housing lots and increasing the housing stock. And so we need persons who are trained to be able to move into that area. So if it is that we have so many people that have lost their jobs, then we need to retrain those persons as masons, plumbers, electricians, the young people coming out of school. When we think of how many young people, those may not all of them transition up to the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, but they are in need of that same sort of training that Richard is talking about. And if it is that we can enhance that through technology, then it will make it easier. I mean, we are about to launch a program where we will be utilizing all of those school children using their phones for a particular purpose in terms of looking at resiliency. So there are, don't get me wrong, I think CARE is excellent. I think we do have good programs at the, for the CVQs and at TVET, but we now need to enhance that. We need to take it down to the resource centers where persons who are looking for a job don't have to travel to Castries. If they don't have a device, they can come and have a link and talk to a professor in Barbados. Yeah, I've spoken recently to a gentleman who is an engineer that runs a college in Barbados, and he's interested in coming to train people in looking at structural integrity of buildings and that sort of information in construction. And he says he doesn't have to travel, he can stay in Barbados and be able to share that information with us. And it's something I think that as we move now to identify all of these, new housing developments that we want to be able to promote. And I'm a keen person for green affordable housing, that we now need to train people in the solar panels, we need to train people in solar panel installation, we need to train people in the rainwater harvesting, we need to look at the new building techniques, how to put it. I mean, we do see, yes, some of these buildings may be not as hurricane resilient, but we do see in other territories people putting up houses in 30 days, and less. And they can put up a volume of them. So it means that we need to be able to see how we can tap into that. We speak about the government having PPPs with individuals, which again allows them to leverage on the private sector. Because when the private sector sees that there are opportunities for them in those industries or areas, they will come in, they will come, and it wouldn't just be a reliance on the government consistently, where we have to say, okay, our deficit just keeps growing, you know, we have to increase our debt stock and things like that. It would be the private sector now taking it up and saying, okay, I'm seeing you've laid the groundwork, which is what we've seen the government doing, putting in the ICT centers and focusing there, and now for the private sector to be able to come and say, okay, I see the opportunities and let's go ahead.
Now, it's interesting that you would have mentioned the housing deficit, and also with respect to utilization of solar and whatnot. We did see the budget speak a bit about the 10 megawatt farm that Lucelec would be commissioning in the coming months and what have you. Is that another area for development in terms of our young persons now, not only knowing how to treat with construction, home construction and what have you, but also the solar industry as well? I'm just going to touch on two questions that we had from the Facebook platform. One of them was where we were speaking about reports earlier. The question is, how about the value for money reports in relation to improved government procurement guidelines and whatnot? We were speaking earlier about the government accounting system and some of the issues there. Would we soon be seeing value for money reports? And with respect to public procurement, any changes there with respect to public procurement?
Okay, so in terms of public procurement, there is a reform currently ongoing. We actually passed the Public Procurement Act in December of 2020, and it will be given effectiveness in June of 2021. So that will change the way we do procurement largely for the government. The government is maybe the single biggest procurer of goods and services in the country, and it's important that we ensure there is transparency, accountability throughout that process. So the law has very stringent requirements, and we would have to comply with those once we get to June of this year. Value for money reports, I don't know if we're quite ready for this, but I think it's something in the not too distant future. You'd really have to ensure that your reporting is not just in line with the law, but it's done in a very iterative way, very using technology, so that you can get real-time data to do your analysis, and then you can make those kinds of comparison. So if it's just based on documentation, you're very restricted in terms of how quick you can do those kinds of assessments before you even procure something that might be very time-sensitive to get. So clearly it's the way to go, but I cannot commit to us being able to delve into that right in the short term, but we envisage in the medium term we can consider those reports.
Thank you very much. You are watching the 2021-2022 review, and with me we have a panel that includes representatives from the Central Development Bank, the Department of Finance, and also the private sector. We are going to take a break, but when we come back in our last 10 minutes, we are going to touch on crime and how that influences the economy, and a few other policies that were mentioned in the budget. Thank you, and stay tuned.
So those procurement
we can limit the spread of the COVID-19 virus? The Ministry of Health is your partner in achieving this solution. Introducing the Amber Wristwatch. The Amber Wristwatch is designed for monitoring daily movements while in quarantine. It provides an accurate location and a precise heart rate. The device is also waterproof and can be worn during all daily functions, like washing the dishes or taking a shower. It's worn like a typical timepiece. The Ministry of Health can now better monitor people in home quarantine and receive alerts of those who do not stay in the confines of their home. A 14-day rental of the Amber wristwatch is just $75 US. Let us stop the breaches of home quarantine.
Good evening and thank you for staying with us. We are discussing the 2021-22 budget, and with me we have a panel that includes the Director of Finance, the Managing Director of the St. Lucia Development Bank, and partner at Grant Thornton, Mr. Richard Pittigan. We have been discussing the budget, both in terms of the economic and socio-economic underpinnings of the budget. During our last segment, we just want to touch a bit with respect to crime, because the budget did speak in quite detail to respect to policies associated with alleviating crime. The budget spoke to the parole system that is being introduced with a hope to revamp going forward. We also got some bits with respect to ballistics analysis and what have you. Crime has always been a perennial issue, particularly if the impact it has on our socio-economic landscape. So we just want to hear from the panelists their thoughts with respect to those aspects of the budget. Mr. Pittigan, crime?
Well, I'm glad to hear that crime is going down in certain areas, but the homicide rate is still very high. It's been a problem for decades, and it's getting worse, and it will continue to get worse as you have problems with the economy. So some of the ideas are great. I think anything that can be done to improve and speed up matters that go to court is going to be really useful, because people are very concerned about crime, and it's not going to be an easy thing to sort out. But certainly fixing up, allowing for parole and ensuring that cases can be heard quickly and that evidence can be produced properly and you will get results is really going to be useful in that regard. But putting people in jail is not the answer. It goes much before that. It's what you can do to ensure people don't get into crime. It's going to make a difference.
Yeah. Mr. Boland, Director of Finance, any thoughts with respect to this aspect?
You go ahead first.
So I totally agree with Mr. Pittigan from the perspective of we need to address it beforehand. Mm-hmm. So I'm a part of the National Lottery's after-school program. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it's been suspended for quite a while because no school and COVID and all of those types of things. We are about to meet to look at it closely. But the feedback we got was that from the teachers at the schools were saying, listen, this is now impacting these children positively. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing them not as misbehaving as how they were before. Mm-hmm. And that then will transcend into that person becoming a more responsive individual going forward. Mm-hmm. So that policy that the government had, I think we applaud them for that. Mm-hmm. Yes, there is a need for the normal detection, better detection. The CCTVs will come into play. Having I think looking at what happens to that person after and how do we get them back into society is something that needs to be looked at as well. And having that payroll program instituted, we'll see good steps so that persons coming out can see a path for them not to fall back into their old ways, but something new that will allow them now to share in the economic value of the country.
Just to add quickly, and I know we're pressed for time, but the morale of the security departments and police as well as fire is important. Sometimes we underestimate the importance of good working conditions, training, and use of sophisticated equipment. So the focus in this year's budget will be to ensure that the amenities and infrastructure, the working conditions of the officers within both the fire service and the Royal St. Lucia Police Force would be of a high standard. The requisite training will be given to them. The Scenes of Crimes Office, that will be moved to Forensic Science Laboratory, and there's sophisticated equipment that will be procured to improve the detection of those kinds of crimes. So we expect an improvement overall in delivery of security and defense in St. Lucia.
Thank you, Director of Finance. You have been watching the year in review, the budget 2021-2022. We are pressed for time and we are in our final minutes, and I'll have the panelists just summarize as succinctly as possible their thoughts on the budget and where do we go from here in terms of 2021 and how we can improve the socio-economic landscape of St. Lucia. We would start with Mr. Peterkin. Final thoughts?
Okay, this budget was not really a budget in that regard. It was a statement. And it was a statement of our government that said, this is what we've done, things are in place, we believe that we manage the economy and, base your judgment on that. So that's fine. I mean, these are numbers that we have to work on. But there is one aspect that I wrote up that has to be addressed, and we don't see it in all of this, and that is one thing that has impressed me over the last year is the extent to which the public service has stepped to the fore. And young people that I'm seeing in health, in finance, in the media, have really and truly come out, and it's tremendous. I mean, it's making a lot of difference, and I think there are other things I'm sure PS will tell you about, a guide that's coming out, and it gives me confidence that, while there's still work to be done, that in fact things are being done in a different way than they used to be done, over the past decades or so. So from that point of view, we're not out of the woods. It's going to be a very difficult period. It's not all within our control, but let's hope, let's be confident that in fact things will go our way and we will see ourselves through this. We will have the choice to change or not to change, and then in the year ahead we will start realizing that it is up to us to really make a difference in this country.
Mr. Boland, any final words from you?
So yeah, I see the budget as I mentioned earlier, looking at a sort of a stabilization of us dealing with COVID and the related impact. It now puts us into a transformational sort of position. It looks at, it's seeking to stimulate private sector investment. It is looking to see how we position ourselves for growth going forward for the next 5-10 years. And it's looking at increasing productivity and creating opportunities for everyone. We saw where, for instance, in agriculture, where they spoke about the 7th crop, and looking at persons to see how they can tap into those areas. We saw, as I indicated before, the housing. We see, a number of areas that are trying to stimulate activity to get persons back up and running, seeing where there are opportunities. One of the key has always been, for instance, at the bank where we're looking at financing for the MSME sector. So persons now, if you are not seeing the opportunities in terms of employment, you now not need to focus on how do I start my own business and get a piece of that pie. We are seeing the need for us to improve on infrastructure, which is key in the budget, and agriculture, as I mentioned. So overall, we think that there's always room for improvement. We always know that, but as it is, it will allow us to continue and to be able to put us on a path for recovery.
Director of Finance, the final word is yours on the budget.
Thank you. So the budget aims to bring about recovery, to position the country to take advantage of the rebound in the world economies, the growth that's projected, and to allow the country to become more robust and more resilient. And it's in every aspect of our work, our operations, from defense and security to health, education, infrastructure. I just wanted to touch on something I don't think we dwelt on too much: debt sustainability. Persons lament the increase in the debt stock of 10% in 2020, and we can understand why there was such an increase. But the government has committed to debt management, a policy that will bring about a few things: to lengthen our average time to maturity, to reduce our average interest or weighted average cost of debt, and to ensure that we only take on board absolutely necessary debt going forward. And part of that is commitment both to the IMF and the World Bank that we will adopt what we call fiscal rules. Fiscal rules forces the country to make some drastic changes once the debt to GDP ratio climbs above the prudential limit. So that's what we've committed to, and you will see the establishment of a debt law in the coming months, and we'll definitely will be ensuring that we manage the debt going forward.
Thank you for staying with us. Over the past 2 hours, we have been looking at the budget, and we have had our panelists critique and point out where they believe the budget fell short, and also where they believe that there was value added. Thank you for staying with us, and thank you, panelists. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.